Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Coffee and Conversation with Dr. Doom. That's me. And this morning I'm joined by an extraordinary young woman from Northeastern University, Kayla Vestergaard. Hello, Kayla. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. I really appreciate you being here. Kayla and I got to know each other through Boston Intercollegiate Government. We both did a couple of presentations where the other was there. And I was very excited to join her because she's done a lot of work with climate change, with voter suppression in 2020, and there's lots for us to talk about. So Kayla, before we jump into that, I want to do two things. First, I want to show everyone where you and I are sitting this morning, if you will. And here we are. We're still at 264 to 214. It's Saturday the 7th. It's gone on all week. I guess all we can say is the best thing is that they count every vote, and we know what the outcome of this election is for certain, so avoid problems. But that's where we are this morning. It's 9:30, and we're still staring at this 264 to 214 map. Kayla, would you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you ended up doing what you're doing, all that?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a fourth-year environmental studies and international affairs student at Northeastern. I have minors in global social entrepreneurship and food system sustainability. So it's a lot of different things. I came into college undeclared. I knew I wanted a city for a school, and I also knew that I really liked Northeastern for the co-op, which is kind of like a glorified 6-month internship,
Yeah.
where you learn a lot and often get full-time workers level of responsibility. So I really appreciated my first co-op, which was on like economic instability, and that really helped me get a better understanding of some of the foundational problems of our country.
Mhm.
And then this current co-op that I'm on is at the Global Center for Climate Justice, where we're trying to popularize discourse around climate change, around various issues in our country that intersect. Like right now, we're working on a voter suppression report, and trying to make sure that the average American can like easily understand it through like art, or assuming that they're not going to want to read a long report, though we are working on those, like other methods, so that it's accessible and so that we can have a conversation, so that we can start moving this country in the direction that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the way that we need to as soon as possible.
You know, what's interesting, what you just said is, and which I've noticed in other people your age too, is that a lot of you are taking an issue that you love, such as climate change, but you are learning about the economic part of it too. And I think that it's often been people study one thing or the other and they don't put them together. And I think you're doing the right thing by studying both the economy and the climate change, because they do work together. And a lot of the climate difficulties are driven by economics. And so I think understanding those two things together is really important. And I think it'll make it so that you and your group can sort of explain things in a way that people will understand, because people will understand the economic impact if you explain it to them.
Yeah.
I think the problem that you face, that I face, is that there's been so much nonsense put out there that people are genuinely confused because they have people lying to them all the time about the reality, you know?
Yeah, two things on that. First thing is, so at my first co-op, we were trying to help people investing in the stock market for the first time. They're low
Oh,
income to middle income people. We had only 13 of them. It was small. But we were giving them $200 as a seed. And on the worst day of the stock market, and this was in a 2019 co-op, the most that someone's account had fallen was $4, and they had expected to have lost so much more, albeit they were like invested in a wide variety of things, so it was unlikely that they would take a massive up or down.
yeah.
But talking through them, we were hearing about how their attitudes towards the stock market and towards the economy as a whole was so dependent upon what they had like gathered from the media, which was often through fear-mongering language.
Mhm.
So even a woman, for instance, who had been a secretary watching the news at a bank during the 2008 financial crisis was paralyzed with fear in the beginning because she thought she was going to lose all of this money, and the only thing that was reassuring her was that it wasn't her money.
Right.
But when they got to keep their money and they got to invest it anywhere they want, they were like, oh, I'm far more comfortable with this. I didn't realize that when we talk about helping the economy, most Americans, the vast majority, aren't invested in stocks at all,
Right.
and those are are generally more aware of where they're putting their money, or they have a 401k through their employer,
Yeah.
and it's more securely tucked away, and they can get access to a financial advisor, etc. And I think in general, we have so much language around it and so much fear of the crisis that happened in 2008 and repeating it.
Yeah.
And we feel so personally affected by something that doesn't necessarily realize into harmful effects on us.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It's as though like we look at corporations and we say, oh, they're hurting, therefore we're hurting.
Right.
It might be true if we're one of their employees, but is not necessarily true if we're not.
Right.
And the other thing is, yeah, definitely the economic intersection with climate justice, but also the racial one is so key.
Yes.
I think our generation really understands this.
Yeah.
Taking to the streets for Black Lives Matter, but also in general, realizing that we were built on systemic racism. So a lot of the issues that our country faces, including with voting, are hinged on that, because our country, as you all know, was designed to exclude anyone who wasn't a white property owning male.
Yeah.
And even when we had the 15th Amendment passing and we're supposed to be able to have our Black and brown people voting, they weren't. We had poll taxes, we had literary taxes, and then to this day, we had so many other forms of voter suppression that are designed to suppress the African American vote. We have had Republican strategists for the Red Map redistricting majority project, which was the Republicans' gerrymandering project in 2010, essentially to try to control more state legislature seats than they should have been able to, and it was successful. We had Republican strategists there saying, it's not that we, and this is a direct quote, it's not that we wanted to target African Americans, is that they're Democrats, so we had to target African Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think I can imagine that, or what I hope is that people your age, when you're looking at this stuff, will look at everyone who's older than you and say, what the hell are you doing?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, I was talking with, who was it? I think it was Hannah Navarre, who I also interviewed last week, I think, her and Anna Obergfell. So, and at some point when I think I was talking to Hannah, I said, you know, think about it this way. Pretend that you're on a high school football team and you have a game. So you're all on the field and you're waiting, and the other team arrives and your coach says to you, all right, guys, get out there, have a good game. Now they're going to win because they always cheat, but get out there and have a good game.
Yeah.
What? Excuse me, coach. Wait, they cheat? Yeah, they're going to cheat, so they'll probably win. But hey, go out there and have a good game.
Right.
What are you talking about? That, you know, and the feeling that I get enraged about, which I'm sure you do too, is that the Republican Party is stealing everything right in front of the entire population, and everyone is sitting back doing nothing about it. Like Stacey Abrams, the governorship was stolen from her in front of the whole country.
She pulled up this year, though.
800,000
more people. Oh, let's talk about that. Okay.
Yes. She's one of my favorite people on the planet.
Right. She's incredible. So for those who aren't aware, basically Stacey Abrams is a Black woman who was running for the governorship of Georgia in 2018. And from 2012 to 2018, the person who she was running against, named Brian Kemp, had as Secretary of State and as someone else in like higher Georgia office, managed to successfully purge about 1 million people from the rolls, and a few 100,000 of them were wrongfully purged. You can get purged rightfully if you died or if you moved out of county, but if your address hasn't changed or it's changed within county and you were still purged, it was likely intentional.
Yeah.
You didn't just accidentally say that the voter rolls in Georgia are based on the USPS rolls when they're actually not. Actually not based off of movers list. I didn't mean rolls. And then you call them the USPS mover roll, and then you purge all those people, knowing that most of them shouldn't be purged. You don't do that without some very clear intention. So from 2012 to 2018, he purged a few 100,000 people wrongfully, and then in preparation for the 2018 election, fearing that Stacey Abrams would win, he froze the registration of 53,000, nearly 54,000 people actually, most of whom were Black or brown. I think that was at like 70% of them were Black or brown. It was just disgusting. And so because of that, he was able to win.
Mhm.
She had mobilized 1.2 million new Democratic voters, more than people to vote for her, essentially, more than the Democrats in Georgia had ever gotten for any one candidate.
Mhm.
And so then she lost. And when she lost, she said, not in a concession speech, she was not conceding anything. She said, I acknowledge the legality because you design laws to suppress people who would vote for me, but I do not acknowledge the legitimacy. And honestly,
Mhm.
if Biden were to somehow lose this election, I want him to say the same thing
Yep.
and not concede.
Yep.
The
No,
legality, not the legitimacy.
right. And see, this is the thing that drives me absolutely bonkers. It's that 70% of this country is just lazy. They just are disconnected and lazy and won't fight back. Like so I founded Better Elections in 2016. Let's lobby the electors. It didn't work. But then when that was all over, I said to everybody, okay, we now have 4 years where we have to fight this guy. And everybody walked away. They just walked away. And I was standing there all by myself, like, what are you doing? Like, we have now 4 years of fighting we have to do. And they just walked away. And so the motivating factor for me has been trying to get you guys to fight back, and it's working. That's the great thing. And it's not just me. I'm not saying I'm the only motivating factor. I'm not, but I'm one of them. And I do see that people your age, having watched the millennials be crushed, right? The millennials walked out of college, they were wonderful kids, and they were crushed immediately. And I think you growing up and seeing them have just been totally crushed twice, actually, once by COVID, once in 2008, has motivated you to fight back. And I think that's really important. And because this can all be fixed, right? Voter suppression can be ended very easily if people would fight back, right? All these things can be dealt with if people would just fight back against the interests that they have just caved into. And it's that's why being an American is such a frustrating experience, because I don't know if this is exactly applicable, but there was a man named Norman Vincent Peale who was a minister, a Protestant minister in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and he wrote all these books about how to be happy you suppress your emotions, kind of thing. But anyway, he did write something that made a lot of sense and this was in the anti-communism stuff in the 50s. He said, Americans used to roar like lions for liberty. Now we bleat like sheep for security. And I think that's true. But the security is like the economic security. So that if someone's okay, fuck everybody else. Like, I'm good. As long as I'm good, leave me alone.
No, don't take more from me for my taxes, and that's the only thing I'm voting for is my own self-interest, not the welfare.
And all that has done, as you well know, is underpinned a global system that keeps 6 people richer than everybody else. Right? There was the Oxfam study. There's 6 people who control as much wealth as half the population. And the entire economic system of the planet is designed to keep them there.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. It's just that people won't do anything.
Right. So much of it hinges on American neoliberal capitalism. And so if we're looking at our own insecurity in the 70s, thinking, how do we compete with these other countries? How do we prevent globalization from making our own economy fall? Well, we do that by taking advantage of our labor, they thought. We prioritize profit over people, a la Milton Friedman's maximum profit doctrine.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we transform our society into no longer caring if a worker is loyal and has been here for 20 years and praising him for that or her for that, but instead saying, oh, look at our turnover. Look how many people are interested in us.
Yeah.
Look how many new people keep coming to us, which is so not the way that we should be doing it.
Yeah.
And if you look at other countries, like my family is Nordic, so they will often talk about how ridiculous it is. And I've heard like many Danes and Norwegians talk about this, that we call them socialists. When they're like, no, we went to war against socialism. We call ourselves capitalists. If you look at our systems, we're capitalists. We just understand that there are certain things the government should secure because we understand a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, can't necessarily get them the sort of robust healthcare that they need, which is total side tangent, but it definitely has to do with like whose votes are being suppressed, who are advocating for such policies. You see that same climate connection where the same people who are the strongest voters on climate, according to the Environmental Vote Project, which conducts surveys. It surveys about like 20,000 people in a number of states, 20,000 people each in a number of states. And they found that the people who were most gung-ho about climate were the people who were people of color, were poor, or were young. It wasn't really white people showing up for climate. And so those are the people who are also most likely to be suppressed. And that's what we see.
Yeah, no, it's so much of this is just insanity because, like, for example, now, I'm a Bernie voter. And what people don't seem to understand is Medicare for all saves money. So
Right.
why are we not doing it? Right. And so there is a reason, right, that the rich
In the plan.
say it again, you broke up a little bit.
They were providing a private option as well in the plan. It wasn't like you have to
Yeah.
go completely.
No,
I think
everyone is so twisted.
we don't focus on policy. We have,
Right.
it's not entirely in blaming the media at all by any means, but we definitely see that. I remember like in 2016, I was in a journalism class and we were talking, 2017, I was in a journalism class. We were talking about the 2016 election and about like, why is it that we have Republicans who are mostly listening to Fox and then we have Democrats who are looking at like 9 different varied outlets, and so they're getting such different sources, not necessarily agreeing on everything, but then we have the people who watch Fox as their main unifier, and then they all have this sort of ideology that is built on like sucked dry from this one news media source, which is so dangerous. You get that confirmation bias constantly, and then suddenly it's very easy to understand how you can have a conversation with someone and they're spewing things about the economy being the most important factor and all this other crap, not realizing all the other context that came into why we started having a good economy. Oh, the previous presidency, he was actually Democratic, amongst many other things.
Well, the unfortunate reality is we live in a system with 2 corrupt, dysfunctional parties. One of them is worse than the other. That's true. But they're both neoliberal parties.
Right.
They both voted for the tax cuts. They both voted for the military budgets. And, with a few exceptions, the Democrats who claim to be progressives are not. They pretend because that sounds good on posters when they're running for re-election, but they're not.
Pelosi calling herself more progressive was just funny too.
Right. She was the reason that Nancy Pelosi is where she is she was the biggest fundraiser on the West Coast. That's it. And then the woman who had the seat before her died. And so they thought, well, let's run the woman who can raise all the money. I'm so, I've honestly watched the Democratic Party screw things up my whole life. And I hate them just as much as I hate the Republicans at this point, because they keep screwing up. They're weak. Chuck Schumer during the Supreme Court thing kept saying, we're fighting. And I kept tweeting at him, we all know that you're just plotting to surrender because it's all you know how to do. So I'm going to the People's Party, actually. That's where I'm headed. Once this election's over, I'm going to go right into that. Now, we are rapidly running out of time. And I know that one of the things that we wanted to talk about, that you wanted to talk about, was some solutions about all of these problems that we have. Yeah. What have you been thinking about along those lines? Or what questions do you have about what we might do?
Yeah, I think, so as I'm watching this election, we found out yesterday that Stacey Abrams had mobilized an additional 800,000 new voters. And so if this election, not that it has, but if it had come down to Georgia, she would have been, her mobilization team at Fair Fight would have been the reason why we had Joe Biden as opposed to Donald Trump as the president. Like, her grassroots organizing, as well as the grassroots organizing of so many other people. There's been talk about how we're not talking enough about like Muslims. I think it could have been, I think, was it Wisconsin or Michigan? I forget now. But who really turned out, and like so many other groups, a lot of the white media blamed Blacks in 2016 for the reason Clinton lost. It was because they hadn't shown up, when of course you can only blame whites who voted for Trump.
Right.
But we're not seeing that anymore because Blacks made the difference.
Yeah.
So it's terrible and interesting to see how certain people are spinning this. But basically, we have our minorities to thank for showing up when we systemically oppress them. We do nothing for them, and they still show up to help us as a country, not expecting anything to really change, but knowing that they ought to just in case something could happen,
Yeah.
and caring for our country and for our people the way that we whites don't know how to do. So there's so much grassroots progress, but also I know that you know about a lot of like potential changes, like a possible amendment to abolish the electoral college, to make sure that we have more proportional voting via ranked based or like additional member or mixed party system. So if you could talk a bit about more about those changes, that'd be great.
Well, I think that, the succinct answer to your question is we could put a lot of things into one constitutional amendment, which the people would then have to push because the politicians won't do it.
Absolutely not.
And it will be a huge fight. It will be a huge fight. But the very simple things are add 50 additional electoral votes to the winner of the nationwide popular vote. That's number one, fixed. Then the electoral college problem of returning a bad result goes away.
Yes, it remains, but it's changed.
Right. Now, I do think that the whole system should go, but unfortunately, that's like 100-year fight because the small states won't let it go. But okay, but you can modify it in the short term. Secondly, I think the Senate needs to be elected proportionally so that the more people you have, the more senators you have, because this stupid Enlightenment outdated notion of federalism doesn't make any sense anymore. Not that there aren't some good parts to federalism. For example, I'm kind of happy that at least in 2020, the presidential election is not a federal thing. It's a state thing. And I'm kind of okay with that despite the problems, because I think that Trump would have really screwed with things if he could have. And he can't because it's 50 individual elections,
Yeah.
But I think if we fix the Senate, if we expand the House to 1,200 and have multi-member districts, proportional voting, all the territories should be able to vote. Whether they're states or not shouldn't matter, right? The territory should have a vote in Congress and for president. So there's literally, if we had an amendment that was 2 paragraphs long, you can just fix everything. Now, here's the biggest thing though, and this is the most important one I think right now, campaign finance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Citizens United created a system of legalized bribery, and that has to stop. Yeah. And what they do in civilized countries is you have full public financing of all campaigns. And there's like, so for example, in England, every summer I teach in England, and what they do when they have elections is they use the same ballot that we do, first past the post, which is wrong. It should be ranked choice or proportional, but they use the same ballot. But in a constituency, let's say that I'm not a member of the Labor Party or the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives, but I want to run. What I do is I put down a deposit, and I think that it's £500, but I'm not sure. If I get less than 5% of the vote, I do not get that money back. If I get more than 5% of the vote, I get it back. So what that does is it discourages real wackos, because who's going to, it discourages people because you're not going to waste £500 for the most part. But it allows people to have a platform. And once you're in, then you get the public money that, helps you to get campaign commercials and stuff. So you can do a system like that. And then all you have to say is public money cannot be used for negative advertising. You can only advertise about yourself. So, imagine if we had a system where everybody's political advertising was not, she's the devil. It's please vote for me because I support this and I support this and I support that. The problem with negative advertising is one negative advertisement is as effective as 7 positive ones.
Wow.
And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
So you have to make it so that it's more cost effective to go positive. You can do it. Civilized countries do this, right? And the other thing that drives me bonkers, and I'm guessing that you've encountered this too, is sometimes when I'm in class, I'll say something, and immediately it's like, well, we can't do that, professor. We're too big of a country, or it's too this, or we can't. there's this immediate like, no, we can't do anything. What are you talking about?
Right. We need system change. So let's talk about system change.
Right. People do this. They've been doing it for 25,000 years. Like, why can't we all of a sudden fix anything?
Evolve as a society.
Right. It's,
Yeah.
it's capitalism though. Capitalism is a poison. It's a real poison. And so is communism. And so is fascism. These are just poisons. Anyway, it's a frustrating experience. But I think that all of these things can be fixed, but it's going to have to come from you, like from your generation. And you're just going to have to push really hard.
A lot of this is definitely on us, on Gen Z, and on some of the millennials.
Yeah. So what happened to you was that we burned the house down, and then we buried it, and then we handed you the keys and says, "Here's your starter house." It was totally unfair.
Yeah, thinking about how effective Red Map was at redistricting and allowing the Republicans to hold power for so long when they shouldn't have so many seats.
Right.
That was from 2010 to 2020, but because those maps are still used in the 2020 election, we didn't see much of a blue wave, which means that from 2020 to 2030, we're going to have maps that are drawn this year and like around this time that are going to be going into effect to continue to entrench GOP power.
Yep.
And at a time when we need so desperately to act on so many issues, in addition to systemic racism, we have climate change, we have the average American who is like financially insecure, who doesn't have like more than $400 in their bank account. That was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
We have so many issues to fix. And if we have a government that's like in power that is suppressing those votes because in their own selfish interest, we're not going to see those changes. So yeah, we have to push. It's infuriating that we have to, but not surprising that we have to take to the streets and risk our own lives, particularly against like state and local police like threatening our Black and brown people at the same time. Like there's so much going on constantly to stay on top of that. It feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like we should have climate, if anything, be the one clear unifier because we can have 25 million more jobs. Like conservative areas, you can start designing panels. You can start going into like manufacturing. Don't you want solar? Don't you want wind? Don't you want cheaper electricity for your low income communities? Why are we putting pilot programs in wealthy white communities? We should not be. Why don't we have the communities that would stand to benefit the most, that we have marginalized the most, that we've suppressed the most, benefiting the most? Because we can change that. And so like this election means so much because at least with Biden, assuming he gets elected, we can begin to move towards climate justice. Not that he's on board with the Green New Deal, but he's on board with something similar.
At least the Paris Climate Accord, he'll join. I mean, that's one thing.
Which is
No, I know, but it's better than nothing at this point.
Something, yeah.
Yeah.
And that we need between 3 trillion and 4.5 trillion dedicated to transitioning to a clean energy economy. And there's a recent Rewiring America report that came out that said that we need to have a not quite World War II style, but you kind of get the scale idea from ramp up of existing clean tech. So that's like solar and wind farms. That's also solar that's like democratically owned by people. Like in Boston, for instance, our roofs are primed for solar. Or then like after this ramp up, then we have massive dissemination of such technology. We have American jobs, 25 million of them, putting these across the country, installing them, maintaining them long-term. That would be 5 million jobs in maintenance. And so we need to do this as soon as possible, ideally by 2035, to reduce our emissions nearly 100%, which is a massive undertaking. But we can't get there unless we start thinking about how we're going to persuade one of the Republican senators that we need this to pass.
It's going to take, I mean, what we need is a nationwide public information campaign that undoes the damage of the last 40 years. And I think it's the real, here's the really good thing that you and the millennials have on your side. You do not remember Ronald Reagan. And the people that are holding us back are people that idolize that halfwit, right? I mean, he didn't know what he was doing. He had no idea. He just sounded good. And they stuck him in front of some flags And your parents and your grandparents and my parents and my grandparents just voted everything away. They just voted it all away because they listened to that doddering old fool, right?
Yeah.
So the good thing is you don't remember him. And what you can, you can move forward without his ghost.
The entire celebrity aspect.
Yeah.
Trump
Yeah.
is our reason why we don't necessarily trust them.
Yeah.
We used to say anyone can be president as an inspirational thing, and now it's a warning.
Yeah. Right. Right. That's very good. I like that. That's really good. I like that. So I'm really sorry. My coffee's gone and we're just about out of time. So this was great, and we're going to do it again. I'm going to invite you again because I think we could
love
go.
to talk,
All
especially
right. Well,
for the results.
yeah. No. I mean, and we could go for another hour and a half, and I easily. So we're going to do it again. I'm going to invite you back for another one sometime very soon. To wrap up, just remind everybody again, sort of the groups that you're working with at Northeastern that you're.
So I'm at the Global Center for Climate Justice, which is not Northeastern, but was started by some people from Northeastern.
Okay.
By a professor, and then also by Nina Schlegel, who has done wonderful work with the Northeastern Environmental Justice Research Collaborative, NEJRC. And then there's also Sunrise Northeastern, where we're working on making a Green New Deal, Northeastern Green New Deal.
Yeah.
General mobilization in Boston through Sunrise is fantastic. There's Northeastern YDSA, which is like the Young Democratic Socialists of America, doing fantastic work. They were previously Huskies for Bernie. So we're seeing a lot of like progressive groups on campus that are like helping restore my faith, and like we're all picking each other up because it's a time to really come together. If 2020 has been an awakening about anything, it's the value of the community, making sure you have a really strong social support network, and then working with them to make our society better. Yeah.
I'm so proud of you. I mean, and all of you. I've said it, the couple of times that we've been in the same meeting. That's what I've said at the end, right? I mean, how proud I am of all of you that you're doing something.
I'm proud of our generation, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're phenomenal. You're just a phenomenal generation. And I keep saying, like, if you start fighting, then my generation, the half of us that's any good, half of us are horrible. I'm Generation X. Half of us are great, half of us are horrible. The half of us that are great will help you. We will. But the thing is, it's like, it's going to be your world to build.
Right.
And as sucky as it is for us to hand you all the tools to this ruin, in the same way, you will benefit if you are the ones that rebuild and not us.
Right. We have a more progressive vision. We understand like the racial and economic intersections. We understand like we need to pull up Indigenous people into this climate fight because it's their land.
Right. And hopefully, what I'm hoping is, as I've said to my students, that we can put ourselves on a path where we're going to build something like Star Trek. Where in order to do that, you have to eliminate poverty, you have to eliminate illiteracy. Everyone has to have a great education, because otherwise you can't build space stations and star fleets. And what is the point of us sitting on this planet shooting at each other because we're brown or because of which sky god we worship, when we could be building colonies on Mars and deep space exploration? And there's trillions, quadrillions of wealth out there, quadrillions. Like, why aren't we out there? We could reorient the entire planet to that. I mean, you could have people in, South Pacific Islands who've never seen an airplane, right? They could be sewing seat cushions for space shuttles. And I don't understand why we're not doing it. I really don't. Like, why aren't we building the future? Why are we shooting at each other over nonsense? So I'm hoping that, your generation will have that vision.
Yeah, caring for one another, seeing the humanity in each other. I think even like they sound minor, but like apps like TikTok, you're really humanizing everyone who's on there. You're seeing the most ridiculous sides of each other, also the most passionate sides of each other, because there's so much organizing on TikTok. Black Lives Matter TikTok, Indigenous TikTok. You see them pulling up with their stories, talking about how they're organizing their strategies, but also like seeing them in their homes, like in their families, complaining about quarantine and like doing all these creative, fun, dumb things. If there's a moose across the street and they want to make fun of it, or like, etc. but
Yeah.
it's so much humanizing. We see each other for, I think, who we are.
Yeah.
Give people that space, and we're, I think, slower. As long as you respect our lives, you respect LGBTQ plus rights, you respect Black and brown people, you respect women, basic human dignity pieces. If you have that, then we can agree.
Yeah.
Right. If we care for one another, then we can agree, then we can mobilize, and we can build a better society. Yeah, so I am excited about the energy of our generation. I am excited about like a potential like climate wave where we just move together to be so much more progressive and to get these jobs that people have been thinking that they would never have the opportunity to have. Yeah, and to truly show that care, that support, because we can afford it and because it's cheaper than the current system in the long term.
That's the funny thing. It's like the sensible option is somehow controversial. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it's just the conservative forces in this country are just wrapped up in hate. That's it. That's all they have to offer. So progressives have to offer love, and people will turn to it if offered. It's just that no one's offering it. Because right now we have the hate machine that is the Republicans and conservatives. And then we have a collection of half-wits and morons called the Democratic Party who are not paid to stop the Republicans. They're paid to stop Bernie Sanders. So,
I also through rank-based voting, there's hope that we might be able to grow a third party if we have campaign finance, say, the real estate industry in New York, which is happening through their rank base from growing, having special interest parties that aren't like populist representative people, but instead having like third parties, so maybe the progressive Democrats can break off and form their own, and then we'll see.
All right, we really are out of time. My colleague. No. I honestly, we could go another 2 hours. I know, and we will, and we'll definitely do this again. I can't thank you enough. I'm really super proud of all that you've done and appreciative of getting to work with you. I assume we will still work together in the future. And
questions.
Yeah, and you'll join me again. So thank you very much. This is a great episode. I really appreciate you being here, and we'll talk very soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.